Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Praise Yahweh that we are here again on His Shabbat together, and that we've all just come through a wonderful feast of Sukkot, and it just seems so fast. I mean, it's we think we just got back from Sukkot. There was like 3 days ago we had the Shemini Atzeret. It just feels like, wow, gone so fast. But we thank our Master that everyone is back home safely in their homes, and that we are again going through our normal routine of every Sabbath, being together in His presence, looking forward to a new cycle in a few months' time as we continue to keep our eyes fixed on our Master. And we just got Jackie's at home. She's a bit under the weather today, so keep her in prayer. She's saying Shabbat Shalom, beloved. Carol's saying Shabbat Shalom. Jillian is also up early in the US saying Shabbat Shalom. Mandy saying Shabbat Shalom, and Cheryl also Shabbat Shalom. Everyone so blessed. My online connection is back. How wonderful it is to be together in His presence. So praise Yahweh. And for those that are also online, I see your Ricky Fire is online with us, and the Malachis. So it's good that everyone can be together. And it is such a blessing that we can get together in His presence. Just thought I'd share so that even those that do watch the recording a bit later, just so they understand our timing and why we do what we do. I know Jillian sent me a mail giving a good testimony of how she was witnessing with others about the appointed times of the Master and the correct timing. Then she also asked, would it be possible that we stream a little bit later in the day, and so that it could be more people overseas that could kind of get up at a time that would be more suitable to them, and we could still kind of balance that out if we started late in the afternoon and finished at like sunset. I just wanted to share that we have looked at this possibility over the last number of years, even before we started streaming. And what we found is that the pattern that we followed is the best pattern for us to ensure that as a collective we can guard the entire Sabbath. For those that are online, what we typically also do is we get together at 10 in the morning. We have our lunch at 1 to 2. Then we typically will go 2 to 3. There are odd occasions where we do all our readings before lunch. Sometimes we may do a Zoom, but those that are physically here with us, be it many or few, we've gone through different cycles. Typically, we still hang around till 5 or 6 anyway, and fellowshipping in the Word. So that's guarding the Sabbath together. Obviously, we'd love to have more physical presence, but as it is right now, it is the best. We also know that our brothers and sisters in our same time zone and our same, country and time zone are also gathering at this stage. And the reason why we've recorded and upload the videos to YouTube is so that those that aren't able to get up later are able to catch the teaching and be able to still connect like that. So we've wrestled over the years in different options, and what we have found is with some groups that do gather later in the afternoons, I'm not going to highlight which groups or whatever, but we found in the past that leads to open doors of breaching the Sabbath, where the early mornings are, possibly people tend to compromise the Sabbath. So we're doing our best to assist us as a body to guard the entire Sabbath together. We can. Ricardo's asking, can we bring back Erev Shabbat sermons? And we used to do that. We used to gather physically on Erev Shabbat until a number of years ago, where we felt, okay, now individual families, it's good to spend that time alone, starting the Sabbath together, building the intimacy in the house. And I still believe that's the way it should be. Should we ever decide to bring back some Erev Shabbat things, or even like we were at Sukkot doing some Erev readings, we'll see as the Master leads. But for now, we're still sticking to our 10 a.m. start and going through the day as the Master leads us. So I just wanted to share that so that we can just give everything into perspective of some people querying, hey, what could we do this? Could we do that? We've settled on what works for us as a fellowship and what we believe is something that assists everybody, no matter what time zone we're in, to get. It's obviously a blessing for us when people are many hours behind us getting up live, like Gillian, and sometimes Rochelle joins us live. But then we also realize the benefit of those that can watch the recording later and still connect with us and share their thoughts and things. So our Master's timing is perfect. So I believe that we are in line with what he wants us to do. So I just wanted to share that before we start, so anybody that does watch the recording later, you can understand why. And I do encourage you to tell others to watch the recordings, to connect with us. And if they can get up early, that's even better, I suppose. But nothing is better. It's what works wherever you are in your time zone. Let's pray that the Master keeps adding to us those that are hearing the truth, and as we keep making it available as long as we are able to. So let's keep doing that. So today we are getting into every Torah portion is important, but certainly one in this day and age of calling people back into a routine of obedience, Sabbath keeping, feast keeping. We've just been through a cycle of feasts. So this Torah portion, we're going to look at an overview again, or the clear instructions regarding the feasts, and a bit more on set apartness, and, reminding us more and more and more how we are to be more set apart. So we're going to look at Wayyiqra 21 through to the end of 24. And so we're going to start with Wayyiqra 21. Who's reading first? Kayla. Okay.
And Yahweh said to Moshe, "Speak to the priests, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, no one is to be defiled for the dead among his people, except for his relatives who are nearest to him, for his mother and for his father, and for his son and for his daughter, and for his brother, and for his maiden sister who is near to him, who has had no husband. For her he is defiled. A leader does not defile himself among his people to profane himself. They do not make any bald place on their heads, and they do not shave the corner of their beard, and they do not make a cutting in their flesh. They are set apart to their Elohim, and do not profane the name of their Elohim, for they bring the fire offerings of Yahweh, and the bread of their Elohim, and shall be set apart. They do not take a woman who is a whore, or a defiled woman, and they do not take a woman put away from her husband, for he is set apart to his Elohim. And you shall set him apart, for he brings the bread of your Elohim. He is set apart to you. For I, Yahweh, setting you apart, am set apart. And when the daughter of any priest profanes herself by whoring, she profanes her father. She is burned with fire. And the high priest among his brothers, on whose head the anointing oil was poured, and who is ordained to wear the garments, does not unbind his head, nor tear his garments, nor come near any dead body, nor defile himself for his father or his mother, nor go out of the set-apart place, nor profane the set-apart place of his Elohim. For the sign of dedication of anointing oil of his Elohim is upon him. I am Yahweh. And let him take a wife in her maidenhood, a widow, or one put away, or a defiled woman, or a whore. These he does not take. But a maiden of his own people he does take as a wife, and he does not profane his offspring among his people, for I am Yahweh who sets him apart. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to Aaron, saying, No man of your offspring throughout their generations who has any defect is to draw near to bring the bread of his Elohim. For any man who has a defect is not to draw near, a man blind, or one lame, or disfigured, or deformed, a man who has a broken foot or broken hand, or is a hunchback, or a dwarf, or a man who has a defect in his eye, or eczema, or a scab, or is a eunuch. No man among the offspring of Aaron the priest who has a defect is to come near to bring the offerings made by fire to Yahweh. He has a defect. He does not come near to bring the bread of his Elohim. He does eat the bread of his Elohim, both the most set apart and the set apart. Only he does not go near the veil or approach the slaughter place, because he has a defect, lest he profanes my set apart places. For I am Yahweh who sets them apart. Thus Moshe spoke to Aaron and his sons and to all the children of Israel.
Okay, so this week's Torah portion is called Emor, which means say or speak, or he says, or because we see that coming from the word amar, which is to utter, to speak, or to say. And we begin this Torah portion with further instructions that Moshe is given regarding the priesthood and the roles of the priesthood on behalf of the people and what they were to do and the standard by which they were to serve before the Master. And he's once again commanded to speak to the priests, to the sons of Aaron, after having been warned and forbidden to have any communication with the dead. And now they're instructed as the priesthood not to even be defiled for the dead, defiled in their service of drawing near and interceding on behalf of the people. And when it says no one is to be defiled for the dead among his people, the idea of being defiled would render one unfit to come before the master in the cleansing that he provides to draw near to him. The Hebrew word for defiled is tameh, which means to be or become unclean or become impure or defiled. And to be defiled as a priest would render one unfit for service, as they would be ceremonially unclean, therefore not able to perform the duties required to bring the offerings made by fire, to set out the bread on the table, to bring incense, to tend the lamps, etc. Anyone that's defiled is not able to do that, because the representation of the service in the tabernacle is about the perfection of Yahweh and his set apartness, and that which he's given the priesthood to actually draw into his presence without defect. And so this chapter, or the previous chapter, actually ended, when we looked last week on Shabbat, it ended with the forbidding anyone to have any kind of communication with the dead. And mediums and spiritists were to be put to death. So we must take note that this is something that wicked people do. They attempt to speak to the dead and call up wicked spirits. We even know in the days of the wicked King Shaul, when he banned all the mediums and spiritists, but yet went to one in disguise to call up Shemuel. And Shemuel woke up and he said, "Why are you waking me up?" So the fact that Yahweh forbids this doesn't mean it's not something that's possible, but it is certainly something. I've put it down. Sorry, my earphones are giving some feedback there, so I just put it down. So whether it's possible or not, or people are able to dig into the spirit realm, that's what Yahweh's forbidding. Totally. Devarim 18 verse 11 tells us that there should not be found in our midst one who calls up the dead. Any communication with the dead is strictly prohibited. And at the beginning of this chapter, the instructions expand on this, making it clear that the priesthood must not even be made unclean for the dead. The Torah, which the serving priesthood was to represent so that the nation could understand what it means to draw near to Yahweh, the Torah is life. It represents life. And therefore the priesthood, who were to be the ones officiating the service of causing the people to draw near to Yahweh, to be the teachers and instructors of the Torah, were to remain as far as possible from the dead. To be defiled from the dead simply means also touching a dead body of a person that's died. Now, in verse 2, there is an exception that's made for a priest's close relatives, as there could be an occasion that a close relative dies in their household, and the Torah kind of grants this kind of defilement to be permitted for the priesthood, as a dead body in a home would certainly defile the home and render that home unfit for service. In ancient Israel, we must remember there weren't funeral services that would take care of all the dead bodies, and it was responsibility of direct family members to take care of burying the dead. And when one would be doing this, physical touching of the dead body would actually have to be done. And what we take note of, a dead body is nothing more than meat and bone. There's no life. The life is gone. There's no nefesh. And therefore it's defiled because it has no life in it. And so one would become defiled or ceremonially unclean just by being in the same room as a corpse. And so the direct family would have to prepare the body for burial process, a process of washing and wrapping the body for the grave. So therefore, whenever anybody would do this, it would render them unfit to go and perform the set-apart matters in the day that they are doing these things. And so all Yahweh is doing here, he's highlighting how he is representing life, he is life, and therefore anything that draws near to him must not represent death. Even Aaron and his sons, remember when they were set apart and when his two sons were struck dead, he wasn't even allowed to, they had to call his other brothers to come, other Levites, cousins if you will, to come and get the bodies out, and they had to remain in the service, and they were not to mourn. Let the rest of the people mourn, because they were still in service of the tabernacle. And as I said, the Torah represents life. And what we see here, the exception for a priest to become defiled for a dead person is linked to an immediate family member. It was allowed, and it wouldn't be extended for cousins and uncles, etc. It teaches how Yahweh shows us that there's precedence over one's true responsibility for family when it comes to servanthood in the tabernacle. So he's permitting here for an immediate family member, you are permitted to take care of the dead, but then you're not in service. That's the basic idea that would come about. So the Torah represents life, and this caution that's given here is that the priesthood must at all times, a serving priesthood must at all times remain undefiled, because they are serving the entire community. That's why the book of Hebrews says, obey those leading you, because it won't be good for you if you don't, because they're serving you, and don't let their job be hard. I mean, there's this principle of always the pattern of service that our master is demanding and prescribing is set apartness. And when something defiles that set apartness, it's no longer set apart in representation of a body that should be drawing near to the master. And so Devarim 32 reminds us that the Torah that's given to us is not a worthless word, it's our life. And it's by this word that we prolong our days, where we have the breath of Yahweh, to give him the proper praise. And in verses 4 to 5, it further stipulates that a leader must not defile himself among his people to profane himself, not make bald spots on his head, nor shave the corners of his beard, nor cut themselves. And we must remember that all of these practices were typical pagan practices that were done in mourning rites for the dead. And we see how a leader is one that's supposed to lead with integrity and soundness in the Torah, so that those he's leading will follow that pattern. This doesn't say, okay, I'm not a leader, I can do it. When a leader is showing you the way, those who are following should be following that way. Okay, so the fact that a leader is not even allowed to defile himself with the cutting of his head, shaving of his head, and cutting of his head, cutting of their bodies and things, that's what the pagan rites were doing. Some people tend to do this, oh no, only leaders. No, but you must understand, if the leader's leading you, then they are showing you the way to go. So the responsibility is always about order and proper set apart behavior within an entire body. Because if a leader shouldn't be doing it, then it doesn't give license for everyone to say, I'm not a leader, I can do it, because then you're not being led properly, And so we must remember that we are not to profane our worship before the master. And all of these things, while regarding the physical service in the earthly tabernacle, we must remember that this all gives us perfect shadow pictures of teaching us in terms of our walk in the master as bringing spiritual offerings of praise. We must learn that this teaches us lessons on what we are to be on guard against, lest we profane the set apart matters of our master. And to profane something means to treat something that is set apart with abuse, with irreverence or contempt. In other words, not respecting what the set apart matters are. And in Hebrew, the word for profane, halal, means to pierce through or kill or wound or defile, because that's what you're actually doing. It's, if you profane the set apart matters, it's like you are killing the master all over again. You're trampling underfoot that which he came to cleanse us with, and treating it as something that's not set apart and is something that should be held in high reverence before the master's face. So we've spoken many times about that fine line, if you will, between true worship and profanity. And that, I think, is a fine line, or a small gap that so many people still haven't figured out yet, because they think that they are worshiping the Father in truth and in spirit, but yet they're actually profaning worship because they are defiled through their actions. And when we take this defiled for the dead into bringing it into a allegorical or a metaphorical lesson as well, not just on a practical sense, which it still carries, but yet on a spiritual sense, in understanding that we are a spiritual house, we must also understand that there are those who are like the walking dead, so to speak, and touching or engaging in those common matters that defile our set apartness, then coming before the master with having done things that we should not have done, it defiles our service before him. And we end up in danger of profaning rather than praising the master. Now, a leader in this chapter is not restricted to the priesthood. A leader refers to one who's head of the home. Could be the husband who's expected to lead his family properly according to the clear instructions of the Torah and not found to be doing as the nation's doing. So it shows proper order within the homes that's supposed to be adhered to. And it also leaders of the tribes and leaders of the clans, etc., etc. So when we look at some of these practices that are being forbidden here in terms of cutting one's flesh, shaving one's head, it's still practiced in a lot of cultures today. I've mentioned in the past that in Africa here, there are some cultures here who cut off the tip of their small finger when mourning for the loss of a close relative. In ancient times, the cultic practice of shaving one's beard for the dead was done so that the shaved hair would be placed upon the deceased face so that it would make them not recognizable by the dead spirits, and it was a way to appease the spirits of the underworld. That's how sick their belief systems were. And once again, we've discussed in other Torah portions that cutting or shaving of one's beard is strictly forbidden. And a lot of people think it's only for the dead. No, you don't do it for the dead, which presupposes you have a beard anyway. Okay, so, let's just put logic where logic should be. And you can go through my article on why men should have beards and full beards. What we do take note is that the command that's given in chapter 19 is for all Israel not to shave their beards. And here in this chapter, it gets further emphasized on the leadership, which doesn't mean, okay, now we're growing in our understanding, so it's really only the leaders. No, it shows the responsibility of the leaders and the example that they are to be leading by. So we need to understand, because when the person who's not leading is adhering to these instructions and they see a leader shaving, they think, well, why now? Why am I have to? Not the leader, So there are a lot of leaders today that are clean shaven. I've said it many times, there are certain physical attributes that should be red flags to us today, that should be like no-brainers when we see it happening. But yet, why is it that so many people don't see it? Claiming Torah teachers today that are clean shaven they shouldn't be leading, because they've already defiled themselves by doing so. Because they are defiling themselves with dead works. And so we must be on guard against that. Prominent leaders today within Torah circles are actually defiling themselves by shaving their beards or rounding their beards, upper lip shaven off, goatees, whatever there is that you do, it's not permissible. We look, when Yechezkiel is given the example of the millennial reign, we're going to look at that a bit later in terms of the sons of Tzadok. We also see how, you don't get ragged in your look. It must be Old English, well-kempt or well-trimmed, but not destroyed, not shaven away. Okay, and for more info on that, please go to my article, because I look at all scriptures regarding beards and the shaving of one's head, etc. We shouldn't be doing that. So what we take note of here is that the urgency of understanding this is something that must be taken serious in our day, because a lot of leaders are not adhering to the Torah the way they should. A lot of people are saying, well, they're teaching me good stuff, so I can do what they do. And isn't that almost like the blind leading the blind that our master warns against? So the argument that's often used in this instruction, where it's given in regards to the dead and being defiled for the dead, people think it only applies to when it's in mourning. And in Wayyiqra 19, when we're told also to not make any cuttings and no tattoo marks, people also think, well, that's only in regard to the dead, So if it's only done, the command is regarding no cutting or no shaving for the dead, is it okay to have a tattoo? And the answer is no. No markings or cuttings in the flesh is allowed full stop, period, exclamation mark, you know. These practices such as tattoos or cutting of temporary or permanent designs into one's body were actually pagan rituals practiced in occultic worship. And the generation of priests that had grown up in Mitzrayim, where preparation for the death consumed the greatest energies of one's life, because it was now this supreme position of actually handling the dead, was seen as something that was to be aspiring to, you know. So they would make markings and cuttings and remembrance and all that. So those things were done. But then it becomes, okay, if I'm not doing it for the dead, then it's okay to do it. We must understand the root of all this. Yahweh designed us the way we should be. We shouldn't be marking ourselves. The mark that we have is our obedience, not in a physical cutting of the flesh. And so we have to understand that we see that even in ancient times when people were preparing for the dead, we see that in archaeological things that a lot of times people who should have been in the Torah, Israel, were practicing the ways of the nations. We have archaeological evidence that they were doing the same things that the nations were doing, and Yahweh makes it very clear, you shouldn't be doing that. You know, cutting in the flesh, the Hebrew word for cutting is seret, which means an incision or a cut. It comes from the verb sarat, which means to incise, scratch, or make cuts or severely injure. And the ritual of cutting oneself for the dead, as I said, a common pagan practice, still done in many cultures. We're reminded of the Baal prophets that Eliyahu confronted. You know, when you had the 400 Baal prophets and the 450 prophets of Israel, or vice versa. In other words, it was, or was it 850? Hey, 850 to 1. And they were trying to call on Baal, no answer. So they were cutting themselves according to their practice. So we must be on guard against not doing what the nation's doing. And then understanding that this is not isolated for just ritualistic burial rites. It is a representation that represents death, because remember, when you cut your skin on purpose, I mean, if you fall and cut your skin by accident, it bleeds. But when you deliberately cut your skin and make an incision, you are bleeding. And so it's a representation of a disrespect for the life that our Master has given us. Did you want to share something?
No, I was just thinking about every human is Yahweh's creation.
Yes.
Now you go and draw on what he made.
Yes.
He made you the way you're supposed to look. I mean, that goes to even facelifts and
Yes.
docs,
Yeah.
all the amendments people make to their bodies. But then I was thinking about, I mean, there's a stupid little example, but how I feel we create songs, and then we made album covers which people attempted to change, or you create a song and someone sings it in a different tune or a different voice or whatever. It's offensive because you create it the way it's your creation, and then somebody else takes it and they change it.
Yeah.
How I feel when people do that. How must Yahweh feel?
Yes.
You know, he creates us the way we're supposed to be, and we think we can do better.
Yeah. Ricardo's asking in verse 3, if the maiden sister of a priest died and had a husband, then she's not a maiden. Okay, I'm trying to understand his question. Would it be the responsibility of the husband to bury her instead of her father? Yes, it would be, because she's married. She's no longer under her father. She's no longer a maiden. She's under her father's. So I hope, yeah.
Once you're married, you're not a maiden.
Once you're married, you're no longer a maiden. Okay. So let's just touch on what he was saying in verse 3. I just want to clarify. And for his maiden sister is near to him, who has had no husband, for he is defiled. So it's exactly, the maiden hasn't had a husband. So it's still his sister, and yes, he can take care of his sister. It's immediate family. Okay. All right, so we are to be set apart, and it's Yahweh who's identifying the clear standards of set apartness. We've spoken of set apartness, Kadosh, many times, so you want to be reminded of that. You can look at the notes. I'm going to be running through a lot of things here, not deliberately too fast, but there are a lot of things that in this Torah portion we do tend to repeat a lot, because we're looking at the feast, and we talk around the feast times, a lot of things. But here, before we are only in 21 round, we're going to get to 22, then 23. We understand that it's all about set apartness. And when you don't live set apart lives before the Master, you are profaning him. You are piercing the life that his word brings to us. You are destroying, and in a sense, when you are profaning your worship, you're in danger of grieving the set apart spirit, for which our Master said there's no forgiveness for. You know? And so we must also understand that when we misuse his name or treat the set apart matters of his word common, or represent him wrongly, allowing that which is strictly forbidden to be lived out with no regard or reverence for the set apart instructions, we are actually profaning his name. We render his name of no effect by not using it at all as well, but rather substitute euphemisms or translations or pagan-rooted titles. It's a profaning of his name. We, as set-apart children of the Most High that have come out from a corrupt system, have been washed from that. We must also realize that we cannot tolerate mixing titles. So here's another red flag. And these become obvious, and I've mentioned them many times, and I'll keep repeating them, not because I think I'm trying to do it arrogantly, but it's with urgency for a call for a bride to be set apart. So when you see somebody presenting themselves as a teacher of the Torah, but they are clean shaven, I wouldn't listen to them. Unless they've taken a Nazirite vow and they've shaven everything, okay? Typically, those that are doing that will also be possibly mixing their titles in their worship, in their expression, etc. So we must be on guard against those who are tolerating the use of names and titles that Yahweh does not want to be called by. When he says he will remove the names off our lips and restore unto us a clean lip, we should give high reverence to that and say we will no longer declare the names of false mighty ones on our lips. And for teaching purposes, we highlight in today's age, Yahweh is not the Lord and Yahweh is not God. And we need a Salah moment for that, I think, at times, for people to hear that again. And as Colleen was talking about changing Yahweh's creation, etc., we also realize that we cannot take that which has been done in a profane way, bring it into Yahweh, and try and change the names. That's why in terms of worship, which our lives, we worship in spirit and truth, and singing is part of that worship. It's not just limited to our singing or our praise. Bringing praise and worship from a corrupt system, then trying to add Yahweh's name where it was corruptly presented wrong, you can't bring that worship. It's a corruption. You shouldn't be doing that. You know, so we must be on guard against... Yes, I was just thinking, the whole AI thing that we touched on a couple of weeks ago, you know, we must be on guard against, because remember, we're talking about not being defiled for the dead. And I said, what is a dead? It's just bone and flesh, no nefesh, no soul, no life. You know, AI has no bone or flesh, but it has no nefesh either. So the highlight here is when you're using AI to bring to you a worship and you are using that worship, we use instruments and there is technology used, but it's still driven by somebody who has nefesh, okay? But when you just let something create and a voice appears, it's stolen from voices that have been recorded throughout. That's what's happening. So it's a stealing, number one, that's happening. And it's no life in it.
It's also taking from people who don't worship Yahweh.
Yes.
And you're using that
Yes.
to worship Yahweh.
Yes. So it's using sources that are actually corrupt to present something. Isn't this what the enemy is really trying to do? And it's a blasphemy. So we must be on guard against, you know, whenever you hear a song, you get a song, know where it's from. And if you're not sure, then rather leave it out. Even if it's from a credible source that has nefesh, go and see what their beliefs are. Because even a corrupt worship system today, just because they're using the name of Yahweh in their songs, doesn't make it suddenly right, because the source of it is already from a corrupt source. So you are, in a sense, drinking muddied water, and it can poison you. So we must be on guard against these things. Ricardo's saying people who make tattoo marks of scriptures in the name of Yahweh do not represent his majesty. Our belief in Messiah should be seen in the fruit of our lives and our witness of Messiah, not with drawings or words on the skin. And Cheryl's saying, so true, no tattoo is acceptable. I personally don't like to wear jewelry with his name on it. I think that obviously we are to represent the Master's set apartness. And
the high priest had gold on his forehead.
yes, the high priest had a gold plate inscribed Kodesh LaYahweh on his forehead. It wasn't imprinted into his skin. I'm not going to start getting into debate on jewelry and things. We do have a pattern in Scripture where Yahweh adorned Israel with earrings and nose rings and bracelets, but she went and corrupted that. So it's not to say no jewelry allowed. That's not what it's saying. It's saying what you do with it. And with the name on it and things, so I do think that we must be careful on what we are doing. So if you are putting his name on a T-shirt, on a cap, on a piece of jewelry, you know what? You just better make sure that you are not profaning his name, So, we come back to the misuse of his name, and it can thread into various areas of our lives. And the priests in the tabernacle had a job to do. And that was to tend the service in the tabernacle and bring the fire and the bread to Yahweh. And as we know, the fire and bread represents the very presence of Yahweh as they're brought to Yahweh to maintain his presence within a community. Bread is symbolic of his word. As we know, the manna in the desert or in the wilderness, not just the desert, in the wilderness, where our Master said he is the bread from heaven. He's also the rock that was struck in the wilderness. We also understand that the word made flesh, coming in the flesh of man, dwelling among us, gives us access to partake in him when we partake of the Pesach meal, etc. So when we see this strict and very serious call on the priest, the set-apart call for priesthood, we must be reminded when Kepha tells us, as part of our readings today, to remind us that we are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a set-apart nation, a people for a possession. We must remember that there's a standard of set-apartness that's given for all of us. Now, we've often said, and I'm going to talk a little bit later on the Tzadok priesthood, we must understand the bigger picture in our Master is we are a serving body in him. So we are a set-apart nation. We are in him a royal serving priesthood as his high priest, but yet we're not all functioning in the service of the pattern that's shown in a Levitical priesthood, because then we understand that pattern. Even within Levi, as we'll speak later, not all were sons of Tzadok, but yet all sons of Tzadok were all Levites because they were from the tribe of Levi. And now in the body of Messiah, we also understand that there are some appointed in the order of Melchizedek to equip the body. Now, while holistically we are, as Kepha reminds us, a chosen race, a royal priesthood, we're all that. But within that, there is a priesthood of Messiah that's appointed to serve the rest of the body so that we collectively are able to represent our high priest and king in the order of Melchizedek. Okay? So we are a set-apart people, a nation for a possession, but within that body, there is a priesthood that equips the body to serve, representing the high priest and king. So the pattern of the priesthood of ministering before Yahweh is a pattern for us as believers in Yeshua today, that by his life, death, and resurrection, the way was made possible for all to approach a set-apart Elohim. And therefore, the ministry of the tabernacle is still the same, because we, in Messiah, are the dwelling place, the tabernacle of the Most High. And now that we've entered through the door, which is Messiah, he is the door, we have a strict protocol to follow as we draw near to a very set-apart Elohim and walk upright in his kingdom. The bride of Yeshua walks obediently in the covenants of promise. which we've been brought near to by his blood and his blood alone. And so when we look at this chapter, we understand that we must be partakers of life and not engage in matters of the death or the dead. You know, verse 7 speaks of how a marriage is to be held in the highest regard, especially for the priesthood. I mean, it's not especially for, but it's for everybody. A priest was not allowed to marry a whore or a defiled woman or one who had been put away by her husband. Marriage, as Shaul calls it, the mysterion in the Greek, the mystery. It's a picture of that union between Yahweh as creator and his chosen bride, his created. And it's also this thing that we understand that every single marriage has the ability to represent the true marriage union between the creator and mankind. Now, every marriage doesn't do that. And that's why Yahweh permits divorce. When there's hardness of heart, when there's not a true representation of a bride and a husband being one, as reflected by the mystery of a creator washing his bride and making her one with him. Now, the Hebrew word for whore, zana, means a harlot. It means to commit fornication. It means to be adulterous, to be unfaithful, to be a prostitute. And herein lies the call for all true set-apart believers to not be joined to a whore. Now, this is a literal command for certain, but there's a metaphor also that's been given to us here, and not be joined to following the luring ways of a sinful world and the wicked temptations of Satan. Mishle 23 verse 27, Shlomo tells us, for a whore is a deep pit, and a strange woman is a narrow well. In Mishle 29 verse 3, it says, he who loves wisdom gladdens his father, but a companion of whores destroys wealth. Tehillah 73 verse 27 says, look, those who are far from you perish. You shall cut off all those who go whoring away from you. So recognizing that we are to be a faithful and trustworthy body of Messiah that is governed by a royal priesthood in him for set-apart matters on how to live, we must recognize that as a trustworthy bride that we've been joined to by his blood, there's a requirement of set-apartness and not joining ourselves because we've been joined to him. The name Levi means joined to, and it gives us that parable picture that it's only by his blood that we are grafted in and joined to. Therefore, we should not now be joined to that which it represents whoring. A wife of a priest was to be reverent, not a false accuser, sober, trustworthy in every way. Part of the things that Shaul instructs Timotheus in those who desire to be an overseer and those who are leading, etc. But now we look at the prophets, and we see here was a prophet that was told to do something that was against the Torah primarily. Hosea was taken from the sheepfold, so he wasn't of Levi. So we must understand that. So Yahweh is not breaking his Torah by instructing Hosea, who was a shepherd from Tekoa. No, that's Amos, sorry. But Hosea now being told to go marry a whore. Why? Because his life was a representation to a body at this stage that had whored themselves with the nations.
No, she wasn't married.
No.
She was just a whore.
Yes.
So, yeah,
Yes. Yes. No, she was just a whore. Go marry a whore, you know? And that's what he was told. Hosea was told, go marry a whore. I mean, it must have been shocking to him at first. And it was to show Israel how they had actually become so defiled and how serious her spiritual condition was. It's only by the blood of Messiah that we can be cleansed of all unrighteousness. And so by his blood, he's cleansed for himself a bride that was defiled. This is important for us to understand because not just anybody can be the bride of Messiah. Only those who have been washed in his blood through immersion in his name can become and grafted into the blood or the body of Messiah and a partaking of the Pesach meal, because unless we eat of him, we have no part of him. Shaul warned of a union between a believer and an unbeliever or a defiled partner, and it reminds us that we are not to be unequally yoked. As children of light, we must not be yoked with the things of darkness. Now, what we also realize is that we have all sinned and fallen short of the esteem of our master. We've all whored and defiled ourselves because that's the sinful flesh. And therefore, our master had to come in the flesh of man, but know no corruption, and die and be raised again in order to firstly cleanse a defiled bride who had whored after the nations, and then be able to be taken up as a set apart, cleansed, undefiled bride that's been cleansed in his blood from all defilement, because he says he is faithful and just to cleanse us from all unrighteousness. We also learned today that while many of us may query if we can marry someone who has defiled themselves in the past, we must take note that anybody that comes to the master, confesses their sins, is immersed in his name, partakes in his Sabbaths and feasts, and lives a set-apart life, the old is gone. Okay? We also understand that we must take marriage seriously. We ensure that we don't enter into a marriage covenant that's defiled from the start. Now, when Shaul was going to the nations with the good news, he encountered many people in Corinth that were already married in their corrupt ways, according to their practices. Now, coming to the belief, maybe only one of them was converted or immersed in the name of the master. Then there's this unequal yoking. And in 1 Corinthians 7, he gives us instructions regarding the believer. That if the unbeliever wants to leave, then let the unbeliever leave. But we must do as the believer in a marriage that came to the truth where, while already married, and one part of that marriage is not accepting the truth while the other is, the believer must do their best to live at peace. You know, we don't know. And he uses it about the unbelieving wife. If she thinks to live well with him, let him not send her away. And we also see with the unbelieving husband that the wife must, with a meek, peaceable spirit, you know. We don't know whether we can save our unbelieving spouse or not. In fact, only Yeshua can save. But the witness that you give can draw them closer. But if the unbeliever then wants to leave, that's what he's saying. He's given that as this is what causes the permitting of separation and divorce to take place, when there is that unequal yoking that's surfaced. Obviously, if there's abuse, that's another story. We're talking here of Shaul making it clear that there was a situation where people were married. What do we do now?
But also, it says that if you can live in peace.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you must compromise.
No.
To keep the peace.
No, you don't compromise to keep the peace. That's not living in peace. That's not being a light. Okay? You know, in this chapter 21 of Wayyiqra, it warns that whoring of a daughter of a priest is something that defiles her representation of the priesthood, and she must be burnt with fire. You know, we also see that this is a serious thing that Elohim is giving us here in terms of, in Titus 1 verse 6, Shaul tells us that children of a leader are to be believers that are not to be found being accused of loose behavior. Now, when we're talking about children, we're talking about people that are still living in the home, that aren't now gone out and joined themselves to their husbands, etc. Because we also go in the Torah portion that when a daughter of a priest joins herself to another man, she no longer has the rights of the set-apart matters of Elohim, okay, because she has a new covering, she's gone, as a picture. Now here, this daughter of whoring is one that's still under her parents' covering. And if a daughter is found to be whoring and had now profaned her father, she wouldn't be able to, well, by rights, her father now is restricted in his duties for the tabernacle. That's why she would have to be burned with fire and remove this defilement. Now, it sounds a bit harsh, but we must understand what's coming at the end of the age. At the judgment seat of the second resurrection, there's a burning of all those who have whored, daughters of whoring, so to speak, you know. And so it's only through fire that the lineage of the one who whored can be purged. And so the harlot, the mother harlot whore, whatever you want to call her, in Scripture, she's got all these names. The mother whore of abominations, you know. She has had many daughters who are not walking set-apart lives, whoring after man's ways, despising and profaning the set-apart name of Elohim. Her and her daughters are going to face the just punishment of the fire of our master's wrath with the lake of fire. Once again, when we look at Hosea, it's a picture of the daughter who had been born to him. What was the daughter's name? Lo Ruchama, which means not loved or have no compassion. And it represents the daughters of whoring, because he married a whore, he had a daughter, so it was a daughter of whoring. And we're told in Hosea to strive with your mother. No, it's a representation, because one who is not loved and had no compassion will be loved and have compassion. Here's the good news that we get through the pattern and prophetic book of the life of Hosea. Hosea he listened to Yahweh's instruction. He married a whore and he had a daughter, so there's a daughter of one who was a whore. It's his daughter, yes, I understand. You're not in agreement with that. But we must understand the picture that's given here, because we're also told in Hosea to go and strive with your mother, you know, and contend with her, because it's a picture of that which is. Remember, when we look at the parables of Shlomo, the father is likened to the disciplinary one. And the mother is the one that teaches and nurtures, okay? And so we understand that which has been taught under a false teaching of corruption, as pictured by the whore that's over the nations, and those that have been produced from her, is this picture of corruption that's come from the whore, as pictured through Rome, the fourth beast, that set itself up to produce many in a corrupt worship system. That's what we've been called out from. We contend with our mother because we have come to the point where we have come against that which we were brought up in error, and contend with her. And Yahweh gives this wonderful promise where he'll lure us into the wilderness, where he'll speak tenderly to us. We've spoken at length, and we're going to get to the book of Bamidbar, where it's the place of hearing, where we no longer call him Baal, but we call him husband. There's an intimacy that's now recognized, because it's not the way of whoring that's done anymore. The set-apart matters are set straight. And the high priest was ordained to wear the garments, and he who had the anointing oil on his head was not allowed to unbind his head or tear his garments. Unbinding of the head speaks about the authority that one was under was now let loose. Now we understand that all the priests, the sons of Aharon, had turbans on their heads, and Aharon had a turban and the signet, the plate of gold that was engraved with set apart to Yahweh on it. Now, none of that was to be taken off, certainly when they were in service. You know, the word unbind in Hebrew is para, which means to let go, lack of restraint, uncover, neglect, out of control. And this is the word that's used to describe when Aharon let loose the people. When Moshe was on the mountain, when it says, and Moshe saw that the people were let loose because Aharon had let them loose, to their shame among their enemies. You know, and so when everybody's doing what's right in their own eyes, it's a shame even to their enemies, because you're not being a light. Now, this is a picture for us, because we are the body of Messiah. And as long as our Messiah is the priest and high king, or the high priest and king forever in the order of Melchizedek, forever interceding in the heavenly tabernacle, then we are in him, are not to be out of him. Therefore, we are not to see anything unbound from our head. So when Shaul gives us the image of the armor of Elohim, we think of the helmet of deliverance, which is a renewal of the mind, and not being conformed to this pattern of this world, but being transformed, meditating on the word day and night. So therefore, we should not be taking the idea and the remembrance of our deliverance that we're to be working out with fear and trembling off for a moment. You know, so in other words, we shouldn't switch off set apartness. And so when Aharon had let the people loose, it was a picture of he let the people do whatever they want. They lacked restraint. They followed after the flesh. Aaron at first might have thought, hey, got to keep the peace because the people are hounding me. Where's Moshe? I'll give them what they want. This is a sad picture of what we see happening still today by corrupt leadership, where they're giving what the people want. They're tickling their ears, gathering crowds, just giving them what they want to keep the people content, so to speak, and not actually teaching them how to live set-apart lives. We also take note something unique in regards to this, not unbinding their heads, not tearing their garments. When Messiah was being tried, and before the religious leaders of the day, and the high priest that was residing at the time of Messiah in the flesh of man was Caiaphas. Now Caiaphas tore his garments. And according to the Torah, this would have rendered him unfit for service as high priest. Now we know it was already a corrupt priesthood because Messiah was confronting this. But here was a clear process of the change of the order of Levitical priesthood that Yahweh found fault with into the order of Melchizedek, setting it up perfectly, because at the tearing of his garment, he rendered himself null and void as a high priest, positioning Messiah, who was about to die and be raised again, to lawfully take up the rightful role as high priest over a set-apart people that Yahweh had chosen as a treasured possession. So he rendered himself unfit, Caiaphas that is. And this is where we begin to understand the book of Ivrim or Hebrews, explaining in detail the change of the priesthood that was necessary to take place so that we can serve our master. Did you want to share something? From Levi to Melchizedek, helping us understand that the pattern of the service in the tabernacle that was prescribed is still a pattern that we follow in the order of Melchizedek, but the application of that is now a little different.
Yeshua wasn't from Levi.
No, Yeshua was from Yehuda, and the book of Hebrews even speaks about that. So then we're told in verse 11 that the high priest was not to come near a dead body nor defile himself for his father or mother. We are further to understand that the words of our master, when one of his taught ones came and asked him, can he go and bury his father? And Yeshua said, let the dead bury the dead, because we must understand the context here. That guy wanted to go home, stay at home until his father died so he can get inheritance. And then you think, okay, I don't have to give up everything. I got supply and then I can follow you. And he was saying, let the dead bury the dead. We need to understand that being a member of the body of Messiah, we recognize that we must not become defiled for the fleshly matters of this world, even our closest relatives. And we take that into a practical application of dead works. This means that when we follow and serve the master in spirit and truth, we must count the cost, and we can't go back to old ways and rely and try hold on to those things that we think will keep us going in the flesh, because we render ourselves unfit to be completely set apart. And with the instruction to not go out of the set-apart place and not to profane the name of Elohim given in verse 12, the sign of dedication was on the high priest. We're once again reminded that in the body of Messiah, we are never to stop being set apart. Because this is the picture that we get. Because if you think that, oh no, I can just do something that's not set apart now, that's what the flesh would like to try and get you to believe, you are, in a sense, declaring that Messiah is not interceding and serving as high priest. And if he isn't, then that leaves a lot of people in danger of not having one to intercede. His sign of dedication is upon us. And that sign we're given clearly as a mark of our obedience to his Sabbaths, his feasts, his commands. How many people have often seen by their own family calling them to compromise away from set-apart behavior in terms of Sabbath keeping or other commands, for the sake of a family event or a crisis. And in doing so, they're calling for a set-apart people of the Most High to take off that sign of dedication, that sign of set-apartness, which is clearly forbidden. Because if we are, which we are by our own confession of the body of Messiah, then that means we're acknowledging that the sign of dedication that is on our head, our high priest, affects the whole body. And so therefore, one thing that we must also take note of, because there are people on the Torah walk and they need to hear these things. Now, I know sometimes we go and we have a memorial or for our close relatives that have passed, but that shouldn't be done on a Shabbat. There should be no, let's put it in today's terms, there should be no funerals or weddings on a Shabbat. It's a set apart day to Yahweh. And often families will cause people to take that sign of dedication off because it's a family matter. It's a family crisis. And yes, it will cause division. And that's what our master said. He came to cause division, not bring peace. So these are some of the things that we have to realize. How dedicated are we to keep set apart? That's what it comes down to. Because if it's a sign of dedication, the question should be, how dedicated are you? In the prophets, Israel is likened to a flower that's fading. It's almost like the sign of dedication was losing its shine. And so we must never lose our ability to shine the light of our master. A son with a defect, we're also told, may eat of the set-apart matters and the most set-apart matters, but he was not allowed to bring near the bread. So anybody that had a defect, for whatever reason, permanent or temporary, was not allowed to bring in the bread and change the bread and the showbread or approach the slaughter place. They could partake of all the set-apart matters because it's part of the thing, but they were not allowed to draw near. And the picture that we get here is the perfection of our master that's caused us to be able to have access. Because all of us, look, we all have fallen short of the esteem of Yahweh. So by default, when we look at all these defects that are spoken of here, we all have a kind of defect, spiritually or physically, in a sense, that has rendered us unable to be able to draw near to the slaughter place or to present the bread of the offering. And only in the blood of Messiah has that now been made available for us to actually have access. Did you want to share something?
This is specifically for priests.
For priests, bringing the offerings.
Literal.
Yes.
It's not really spiritual in this sense.
Yes.
Because Yeshua is perfect.
Yes.
He's the one bringing those.
Yes. So he's the one bringing on our behalf. But that's what we're saying. There's a literal thing that's spoken of here in terms of the service of the tabernacle. Because if a defiled priest brought the offerings, or a priest with a defect, not a defiled, a priest with a defect brought the offerings, it couldn't actually represent the perfection of set-apartness in Yahweh's presence. And it would break the ability for Yahweh to accept those offerings. Now, the root word for defect is mum, which means a blemish, a defect, a spot, or a stain. And it represents both a physical defect as well as a moral stain. It's used 5 times between verse 17 and 23, also translated as defect in the ISR translations. But in verse 20, there's another word that's used for defect, and that is tevalul, which means defect, as in a defect in vision, confusion or obscurity, coming from the verb balal, which means to mingle, mix, confuse, or confound. So the restriction on who is able to draw near to Elohim is not a cruel command. It's one that separates the clear distinction of one who is serving and one who is not. And if animals that were brought as an offering were not to have any defects in them, then neither should the one who is offering them or bringing them near on behalf of whoever has brought the animal. Because remember, whoever brought an offering, you had to bring a perfect one. One that had a defect could be done as a voluntary offering, but the priest handling it on the slaughter place should not have a defect. And verse 18 to 20 expands on what is considered as a defect. And we are told that no blind, lame, disfigured, deformed may draw near. Even if a man had a broken hand or foot, he wasn't permitted to draw near, because, it would restrict his movement in service. No hunchback, no dwarf, one who had his vision impaired, one who had a skin problem, or even a eunuch was not permitted to draw near. This instruction on who may not draw near when we think of this, both this is a literal application in the service of the tabernacle, but we also understand the picture that we have in our master, where none of us are actually equipped on a spiritual level to do what Messiah alone could do in his perfection. Now, the Hebrew word blind and the Hebrew word for lame, we understand the pictures that are given here, because when our master came and Yochanan was imprisoned, and Yochanan sent his taught ones to find out, is this the Messiah we're waiting for? And Yeshua said, go report to him, tell him what you see. As a fulfillment of prophecy in Yeshayahu, the blind see, the lame walk. Because here was a prophetic announcement, the one that's going to cause us to be able to draw near in perfection of set apartness is here. Yeshayahu 35, say to those with anxious heart, be strong, do not fear. See, your Elohim comes with vengeance, with the recompense of Elohim is coming to save you. The eyes of the blind shall be opened, the ears of the deaf shall be opened, the lame shall leap like a deer, and the dumb shall sing. Tongue of the dumb shall sing, because waters shall burst forth in the wilderness and streams in the desert. So everybody remember the Hebrew word for draw near? I mean, we're in the book of Wayyiqra. It's a few chapters ago when we started at the beginning. Korban is the Hebrew word that's used for offerings, and it comes from the word karav, which means to draw near, bring near, or to approach. And so therefore, when we understand the command that we're given of our ability to draw near to the Master and be a daily living offering, it's only made possible by the perfect work of our Master. And anything outside of the Master is rendered unacceptable. You know, Hebrews 11, well, I'll read a couple of verses from Hebrews in terms of drawing near. In Hebrews 4, verse 16, it says, therefore, let us come boldly to the throne of favor in order to receive compassion and find favor for timely help. In chapter 7, verse 25, it says, therefore, he is able to save completely those who draw near to Elohim through him, ever living to make intercession for them. In other words, we must realize without Messiah, we have no ability to actually come before our Master in Elohim without his work in the flesh of man. Hebrews 10, verse 19 to 22 says, brothers, having boldness to enter into the most set apart place by the blood of Yeshua, not by your own fleshiness, because we have no right, by a new and living way which he instituted for us through the veil, that is his flesh, and having a high priest over the house of Elohim, let us draw near with a true heart in completeness of belief, having our hearts sprinkled from a wicked conscience and our bodies washed with clean water. And in chapter 11, verse 6, it says, without belief it is impossible to please him, for he who comes to Elohim has to believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who earnestly seek him. Now, why I'm quoting all these verses from the book of Ivrim or Hebrews is to highlight the reality of the power that this letter is teaching us or expressing to us, is that we are able to identify the new and living way which we've been given access to by the blood of Yeshua Messiah, who is high priest forever in the order of Melchizedek, who has brought us who were lame, blind, deformed, crippled, many blemishes or defects, moral stains in our lives. And therefore we've been caused to draw near by his blood, and we don't take that lightly. Therefore, highlighting the responsibility of guarding the garments which he has clothed us with, by which gives us access while still in this corruptible flesh. We have to guard those garments in the perfection of set apartness. The vital lesson that we're able to take at the end of this chapter is that it's Yahweh who sets us apart. And without him setting us apart through the blood of Yeshua Messiah, we're not able to be set apart. And then we're not able to draw near to him. So when we look at this here in terms of the clear instructions that Moshe was told to speak to the sons of Aaron, the priests, it's all about the service in the tabernacle and drawing near, because the duty of the Levitical priesthood to draw near was on behalf of the rest of the tribes, not the nations, the tribes. So therefore now, having this access, we realize the responsibility we have in representing Messiah to one another and helping one another draw near in complete set-apartness, making sure that our lives should have no defect or blemish in our worship. That's why the strict instructions in regard to dress code and pattern of service. So it comes to, for males, when shaving, not shaving, no tattoos. We understand this is aspects of set-apartness because the nations are not set apart, and we should not be like the nations. Okay, chapter 22.
And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, that they separate themselves from the set-apart offerings of the children of Israel, and that they do not profane my set-apart name in what they set apart to me. I am Yahweh. Say to them, Any man of all your offspring throughout your generations who draws near the set-apart offerings which the children of Israel set apart to Yahweh, while he has uncleanness upon him, that being shall be cut off from before me. I am Yahweh. Any man of the offspring of Aaron who is a leper or who has a discharge does not eat the set-apart offerings until he is clean. And whoever touches what is rendered unclean by a being, or a man who has had an emission of semen, or a man who touches any swarming creature by which he would be made unclean, or any being by whom he would become unclean, even any of his uncleanness, the being who has touched it shall be unclean until evening, and does not eat the set-apart offerings, but shall bathe his body in water. And when the sun goes down, he shall be clean, and afterward eat the set-apart offerings, because it is his food. He does not eat that which dies or is torn by beasts, becoming unclean by it. I am Yahweh. And they shall guard my charge, lest they bear sin for it and die thereby, when they profane it. I, Yahweh, set them apart. And no stranger eats the set-apart offering. A sojourner with the priest or a hired servant does not eat the set-apart offering. But when the priest buys a being with his silver, he does eat of it, and one who is born in his house does eat his food. And when a priest's daughter is married to a stranger, she does not eat of the set-apart offerings. But when a priest's daughter is a widow or put away, and has no child, and has returned to her father's house as in her youth, she does eat her father's food, but no stranger eats of it. And when a man eats the set-apart offering by mistake, then he shall give a set-apart offering to the priest, and add 1/5 to it. And let the priests not profane the set-apart offerings of the children of Israel, which they lift up to Yahweh, or allow them to bear the crookedness of trespass when they eat their set-apart offerings. For I am Yahweh who sets them apart. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to Aaron and his sons, and to all the children of Israel, and say to them, Any man of the house of Israel, or of the strangers in Israel, who brings his offering for any of his vows, or for any of his voluntary offerings, which they bring to Yahweh as an ascending offering, for your acceptance, is a male, a perfect one from the cattle, from the sheep, or from the goats. Whatever has a defect you do not bring, for it is not acceptable for you. And when a man brings a slaughtering of peace offerings to Yahweh, to complete a vow or a voluntary offering from the cattle or the sheep, it is to be perfect, to be accepted. Let there be no defect in it. Those blind or broken or cut, or having an ulcer or eczema or scabs, you do not bring to Yahweh, nor make an offering by fire of them on the slaughter place to Yahweh. As for a bull or a lamb that has any limb deformed or dwarfed, you do prepare as a voluntary offering, but for a vow it is not accepted. Do not bring to Yahweh what is bruised or crushed, or torn or cut, nor do it in your land. And from a son of a stranger's hand you do not bring any of these as the bread of your Elohim, for their corruption is in them, and defects are in them. They are not acceptable for you. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, When a bull or a sheep or a goat is born, it shall be 7 days with its mother. And from the 8th day and thereafter it is acceptable as an offering made by fire to Yahweh. But do not slay a cow or a sheep and its young on the same day. And when you slaughter a slaughtering of thanksgiving to Yahweh, slaughter it for your acceptance. It is eaten that same day, leave none of it till morning. I am Yahweh. And you shall guard my commands and do them. I am Yahweh. And do not profane my set-apart name, and I shall be set apart among the children of Israel. I am Yahweh who sets you apart, who brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim to be your Elohim. I am Yahweh.
Okay, so this chapter further emphasizes the need for the priesthood to be completely set apart. In fact, if you're not completely set apart, you're not set apart. So to be set apart and not profane the name of Yahweh by treating the set apart matters of Elohim as common. You know, there are many worldly habits that many believers still need to get rid of. And here we see very clearly the instructions of the need to do that, you know. What we see here is there's a small example, yet quite important for us to understand today on a practical level, is how we conduct ourselves every single day in every circumstance we might find ourselves. And even more importantly, how we conduct ourselves when we're gathered together as an assembly or community in Yeshua Messiah, as a set-apart gathering, which we're going to look at in the next chapter. All too often we see that the very presence of Yahweh during a set-apart gathering can, at times, in the past we've seen over the years, we've had to correct people. It's almost like it gets profaned when people use coarse joking and people slander others, total disregard for the very reverence we are to have for Yahweh's presence that we are in the midst of, when gathering to hear his set-apart counsel in the word. What we also glean from these instructions regarding our set-apartness that's called for is that we must make a concerted effort to pull our lives out of those circumstances or events that most would consider normal, as we recognize that having been in exile for so long, we might have picked up some nation-like habits and patterns that we need to overcome and no longer be seen in our lives. You know, otherwise we might end up defiling the set-apart standards that are required for living the way we're supposed to and what we are supposed to uphold. You know, one of the first or the biggest major change in any true believer's life is Sabbath keeping, in living out a set-apart life that people in the world might consider strange. I mean, how many of you always get, are you Jewish? Are you Jewish? You know, because that's all people see. And we must be on guard to make sure that we're living an active, set-apart life every single day, as marked by Sabbath keeping, to start with, feast keeping, command keeping. When we truly delight in the Shabbat, we'll find that the rest of the week, our ability to remove ourselves from the common or unclean matters will be actually easy. If you find people finding it hard to remove themselves from the profane matters in the week, you'll probably find that they are quick to break the Sabbath and feasts of Yahweh for whatever reason that they might try to justify in themselves. What we also learn from these passages is that we are to walk in the fear of Yahweh. When Yahweh says it's, I am Yahweh who sets you apart, that's the beginning of wisdom. And we are not to treat the set-apart matters of Yahweh as common. You know, we are a set-apart people, and we should not be doing things that are not set apart. These instructions remind us that we are to be constantly aware that we are not to touch or engage in anything that can render us unfit for service in our Master's presence. We thank our Master that we have him in the heavens as an intercessor for us, that when we do find ourselves having messed up, we can run quickly to him and be cleaned up and cleansed of all unrighteousness. That's not a license to mess up. You know, as we've said many times, there's no sacrifice or cleansing or provision for willful sin. This chapter pictures for us the work of our Master as the perfect lamb, of which no stranger may eat of unless the priest buys him with silver. This is about redemption price. Our Master has paid the price of our redemption. We are no longer strangers and foreigners to the covenants of promise. We are native born of the house of Israel, or the body of Israel, brought near by his blood, which Shaul describes very clearly for us in Ephesians 2. Silver, as we know, represents a symbol or the picture of the purity of the word that's been refined, as in Tehillah 12 says, the word of Yahweh are clean words, silver tried in a furnace of earth, refined 7 times. It's a picture of complete refinement. And it's the blood of Messiah that makes us clean through his life, death, and resurrection in the flesh of man, paying the price. And in verse 11, the one bought is not only allowed to eat of the set-apart offerings, but actually he is required to. When we partake of the Pesach meal every year, we are commanded to do so. And it's not just, oh, I had Passover once, it's fine. We are commanded, because if we don't partake in that every year, we have no part in him. And we are further able to realize the need for us to be eating our lawful daily bread, having been born in his house. This chapter carries the clear requirement for the offerings by fire to be without defect. And it pictures for us Yeshua Messiah being our perfect ascending offering on our behalf. In verse 23, we're told that a bull or a lamb that has any deformed limb or dwarfed limb or is dwarfed may be prepared as a voluntary offering, but not as a vow offering. What is it saying for us here? Shaul says, I call upon you, therefore, brothers, through the compassion of Elohim, to present your bodies a living offering, set apart, well-pleasing to Elohim, your reasonable worship. We are to offer up our lives as a voluntary offering, living set-apart lives that is pleasing to Elohim, and we do that voluntarily unto him. So while we, in and of ourselves, can never be the ascending offering that's required, we see Messiah became that for us. And therefore, we can give gifts to Elohim of our lives that's not done in defilement or anything else. Rather, he's equipped us to be able to present our lives as a daily living offering. Set apart living actually calls for a life of service that pleases Elohim. This is our reasonable worship. And Yahweh is not unreasonable because he's given us everything we need to serve him. And when reading all of the offerings that are acceptable and that which is not, what we can deduct from this is that when we offer up our lives in being set apart before him, it can't be half-hearted. It can't be something that's done with half an effort. I'll do that much, but not all. It's an all or nothing. Did you want to share something? Deduce, deduct, deduce. I had in my notes deduce, and I said deduct. How's that? Okay, thank you for the correction. We're not subtracting anything. What we can come to the realization of is that when rendering our lives as a daily living offering, there's not parts of our lives that we can leave out in service to the Master. What you offer represents yourself. So if your intention is not to bear the fruit in the kingdom and let others eat of that fruit and taste and see how good the Master is, but all you're doing is serving yourself to what's beneficial for yourself, as in the days of Haggai, you're taking care of your own paneled houses, but the house of Elohim lies in ruins, then you're not fit for service in the house. Quite a sobering thing for us to realize. This chapter simply highlights for us further the emphasis on set-apartness. And while these are clear literal commands given to a Levitical priesthood, the sons of Aaron and their service, and who may or may not draw near, the standard of that ability to draw near must be understood, that the perfect work of our Master is not just that he came to die for all, because he did, but not all have received the reality of what that now entails as a responsibility. So when we look at the perfection that Yahweh demanded in the tabernacle service of the Levitical priesthood, and that he found fault with them because they didn't adhere to all of these, that's why there was a necessary change in the priesthood. So that now we actually have no excuse in the blood of Messiah and the perfection of set-apartness that is to be displayed to him. We have no excuse not to be set apart and without blemish.
I think if you say he came to offer the sacrifice required,
Yes.
instead of saying just he came to die,
Yes.
then people will understand, yes, we don't have to sacrifice, but we still have to bring that blood in a certain way.
Yes.
Yeah, you can't bring it any
No.
way you want to, but you have his blood to bring.
Yes. And so therefore, we always say, we go through the strict requirements. When I say strict, I mean, I don't like really the word strict because... Precise, thank you. Precise requirements that Yahweh requires of service in the Levitical priesthood, we have to be made aware and sober up to the reality that in Messiah, there is actually a higher standard that is being presented for us, because in Messiah, there's no fault found. where he found fault with the Levitical priesthood who actually operated in the flesh, while we're supposed to follow the pattern of the Spirit. And that's the fault that he found with them. And now in the Master, when we worship him in spirit and truth and walk according to the Spirit, we cannot for any moment think we have justification on not being able to do what the word demands for set apartness.
So because technically you could in those days blame the priest
Yes.
for if something goes wrong, but now you can't.
No.
That's why it says once you've known, once you've
Tasted.
accepted,
Yeah.
there is no more slaughtering.
No.
You will fully go against it.
Yeah. So the emphasis here, building up to the chapter that we're going to read now on the feast, the emphasis is about set apartness. And a lot of people disregard this book for saying that was only Levitical priesthood. But if we don't study the intensity of what Yahweh was demanding and is still demanding, because his word is alive, it's living, it's same. Yes, he is the same yesterday, today, and forever. We have to see that the change that was necessary was so that Yahweh and his desire to be with his created, it shows actually the zeal he has to be with us. And he's not just throwing us away, as if he's saying, I came to bring the ability for you not to have fault. Because there can still be a fault in drawing near to Yahweh. Then you are destroyed for that fault. But he provided the perfect way that in drawing near to him in perfection of set apartness, you can have the assurance and the confidence that you will be accepted. Because the offerings that were to be brought to the Master and the Korban drawing near was to be accepted. What's acceptable on the slaughter place? What's acceptable to him? And here he's setting the standard of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. That standard does not change. So we also cannot come to the Master while having defects. Now we take that onto a spiritual level. If you are out doing what the nations are doing and then try and show up on a Shabbat bringing your offering of praise, but meanwhile your life has been defiled, you are rendering an unfit service to the Master. And these are the things that are severely warned against. We've just been through a wonderful feast of Sukkot. And anybody that defiles that feast for any moment renders their life of worship as unacceptable, but yet they all think, I'm in the blood, I'm in the blood. If you're in the blood, you've got to be perfect. You know?
Yeah. Against Moshe, you could still do it, but against Yeshua, you couldn't.
That's what the book of Hebrews talks again. How much worse it is when at the mouth of two witnesses under the Torah of Moshe, how much worse it is when you trample underfoot, because that's what people are often doing today. They are treating lightly the set apartness of Elohim and in a sense trampling underfoot, and all that awaits for them is severe punishment. That's what the book of Hebrews talks about. So with that note of building up to how the standard of set apartness is what Yahweh is calling for, then let's look at a reminder of all the appointed times that he's given us to keep. Chapter 23.
And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and say to them, The appointed times of Yahweh, which you are to proclaim as set-apart gatherings, my appointed times are these. 6 days work is done, but the 7th day is a Sabbath of rest, a set-apart gathering. You do no work, it is a Sabbath to Yahweh in all your dwellings. These are the appointed times of Yahweh, set-apart gatherings, which you are to proclaim at their appointed times. In the first new moon, on the 14th day of the new moon, between the evenings, is the Pesach to Yahweh. And on the 15th day of this new moon is the festival of Matzot to Yahweh. 7 days you eat unleavened bread. On the first day you have a set-apart gathering, you do no servile work, and you shall bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh for 7 days. On the 7th day is a set-apart gathering, you do no servile work. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall say to them, When you come into the land which I give you, and shall reap its harvests, then you shall bring a sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest, and he shall wave the sheaf before Yahweh for your acceptance. On the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest waves it. And on that day, when you wave the sheaf, you shall prepare a male lamb a year old, a perfect one, as an ascending offering to Yahweh, and its grain offering, 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made by fire to Yahweh, a sweet fragrance, and its drink offering, 1/4 of a hin of wine. And you do not eat bread or roasted grain or fresh grain until the same day that you have brought an offering to your Elohim, a law forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. And from the morrow after the Sabbath, from the day that you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, you shall count for yourselves 7 completed Sabbaths. Until the morrow after the 7th Sabbath, you count 50 days. Then you shall bring a new grain offering to Yahweh. Bring from your dwellings for a wave offering 2 loaves of bread of 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour they are, baked with leaven, first fruits to Yahweh. And besides the bread, you shall bring 7 lambs a year old, perfect ones, and 1 young bull and 2 rams. They are an ascending offering to Yahweh, with their grain offering and their drink offerings, an offering made by fire for a sweet fragrance to Yahweh. And you shall offer 1 male goat as a sin offering, and 2 male lambs a year old as a slaughter of peace offerings. And the priest shall wave them, besides the bread of the firstfruits, as a wave offering before Yahweh, besides the 2 lambs. They are set apart to Yahweh for the priest. And on the same day you shall proclaim a set-apart gathering for yourselves. You do no servile work on it, a law forever in all your dwellings throughout your generations. And when you reap the harvest of your land, do not completely reap the corners of your field when you reap, and do not gather any gleaning from your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the stranger. I am Yahweh your Elohim. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, In the 7th new moon, on the first day of the new moon, you have a rest, a remembrance of Teruah, a set-apart gathering. You do no servile work, and you shall bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, On the 10th day of this 7th new moon is Yom HaKippurim. It shall be a set-apart gathering for you, and you shall afflict your beings, and shall bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh. And you do no work on that same day, for it is Yom Kippurim, to make atonement for you before Yahweh your Elohim. For any being who is not afflicted on that same day, he shall be cut off from his people. And any being who does any work on that same day, that being I shall destroy from the midst of his people. You do no work, a law forever throughout your generations in all your dwellings. It is a Sabbath of rest to you, and you shall afflict your beings. On the 9th day of the new moon at evening, from evening to evening, you observe your Sabbath. And Yahweh spoke to Moshe, saying, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, On the 15th day of this 7th new moon is the festival of Sukkot for 7 days to Yahweh. On the first day is a set-apart gathering, you do no servile work. For 7 days you bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh. On the 8th day there shall be a set-apart gathering for you, and you shall bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh. It is a closing festival, you do no servile work. These are the appointed times of Yahweh, which you proclaim as set-apart gatherings, to bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh, an ascending offering and a grain offering, a slaughtering and drink offering, as commanded for every day. Besides the Sabbath of Yahweh, and besides your gifts, and besides all your vows, and besides all your voluntary offerings which you give to Yahweh. And on the 15th day of the 7th new moon, when you gather in the fruit of the land, celebrate the festival of Yahweh for 7 days. On the first day is a rest, and on the 8th day a rest. And you shall take for yourselves on the first day the fruit of good trees, branches of palm trees, twigs of leafy trees, and willows of the stream, and shall rejoice before Yahweh your Elohim for 7 days. And you shall celebrate it as a festival to Yahweh for 7 days in the year, a law forever in your generations. Celebrate it in the 7th new moon. Dwell in booths for 7 days. All who are native born in Israel dwell in booths, so that your generations know that I made the children of Israel dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Mitzrayim. I am Yahweh your Elohim. Thus did Moshe speak of the appointed times of Yahweh to the children of Israel.
Okay, so this is a chapter. Look, we need to know all the word, and that's one of the reasons why we stay with the clear pattern of going through the Torah each week. But this is certainly a chapter that every new believer should be really digging into and focusing on in terms of what Yahweh is calling for each and every week and each and every feast. I fear that, and I don't fear, I'm afraid, whichever way. I'm not afraid about it, but it's the sad thing that I often see is that because people don't know Yahweh's appointments correctly, they are being led astray by adaptations of traditions regarding what are claimed to be his appointments. So first off, as we run through this, I mean, I've got over 100 pages of notes on this here, and if you want to dig into a lot of that, then you can. I'm going to hopefully just progressively go through all the feasts and highlight certain key things that I feel are pertinent for us to understand, especially having just come through Sukkot and completed a cycle for this year. Some things should be a lot fresher in our mind than other things. So, we get, that's why we do the feasts over and over and over again, the Sabbaths over and over again, because we grow in our understanding. This chapter highlights very clearly that they are Yahweh's feasts. They are not the Jewish feasts, they are for the Jews to rehearse, as well as the house of Israel, Ephraim. They are his feasts, they are our rehearsals. And when you don't show up for rehearsal, you won't play in the show, so to speak, okay? And what's worth taking note of is the placement of this chapter. We've just been through two chapters which focus on set-apartness. And these appointed times of Elohim fit so perfectly well in here in progressively understanding set-apartness. That's why I also say, if one is having a Sabbath and today you decide, what should we read? Oh, let's just flick and see what we open to. Oh, this is a nice chapter, we'll do that. Next week you go, oh, you happen to do a chapter from another book or whatever. You miss the progressive flow and the importance of the flow of hearing the Torah with understanding. And so we must be on guard against being led astray to just changing a pattern that has been set for centuries in terms of where the Torah of Moshe is read each week, And so we understand this helps us establish our need to be a set-apart bride. And as I said, this is possibly in our day and age of people coming out of a corrupt system, this is possibly one of the most important chapters for people to get a foundation of understanding so that they guard to do what's required of Yahweh and grow in their understanding of set-apartness. As I said, all scripture is as important, but I'm emphasizing the need because this is the practical side. Because when people don't understand the instructions regarding the Sabbaths and the feasts, they end up doing the Sabbaths and the feasts in a way that is not according to Yahweh's set-apart requirements, but are doing it traditionally, which can cause people to be off target and even off date, which is showing up late or showing up early is not showing up on time, and we are to be ardent timekeepers of our master who's given us his clear calendar of how we are to show up when he commands. This chapter that many exiles need to study in great depth, and not only study but apply so that they glean understanding in regards to the feasts of Yahweh, highlight in doing it enhances our love for him. Because this is love for Elohim when we guard his commands. And you know what? It expresses our ability to learn what true love for Elohim is, and helps us eagerly await the anticipated return of our husband, Redeemer, and King in accordance to the fulfillment of these very feasts that we are rehearsing in expectation of the completion of these feasts and what they are teaching us in his perfect work that will be made complete, doing it with great joy and gladness of heart. And we go through this chapter, we discover the wonder of these appointments, Cheryl's saying, agreed, if we don't stick to the pattern, we struggle with set-apartness because we don't know his right rulings and commands as he desires. I'm blessed that you stress this. I can't stress it enough. We recently have heard of some people, 1 week they're doing a chapter, maybe a chapter out of Bereshit, and then the next week they're doing a few chapters back, and then they're going somewhere else. And it's like, how do you even keep a structure of observance? It's not possible, Verse 1, an often repeated verse through the Torah, and Yahweh spoke to Moshe. Moshe was the one who Yahweh chose to speak to, and is a picture of Messiah, our intercessor. And inevitably, the words that often follow this phrase would be, as in this chapter, speak to the children of Israel. And Yahweh still, through Moshe, through the Torah of Moshe, speaks to us, the children of Israel. The appointed times of Yahweh. This chapter being made available for us helps us understand how we draw near. And so it's important that we have ears to hear what Yahweh requires of us. The appointed times of Yahweh. The Hebrew word for appointed times is moedei. It's the plural of the root word moed, sometimes written as moedim, as most people will say, but here it's moedei, and it's appointed time or the place of meeting. This root word moed is used in Bereshit 1 verse 14. When Elohim said, let lights come to be in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and appointed times and for days and years. Right in the beginning of creation week, Elohim announces that we will have appointed times. And the way that we are to know the appointed times would be determined by the lights in the expanse of the heavens, which are given to us not only to determine the seasons, the days and the years, but are there to know his appointments. Did you want to share something? Come closer to the mic. Yeah.
Say Moedei Yahweh.
Yes.
It's Moedei because it's connected
To Yahweh, yes. And in Bereshit, yes. Okay. Right, so Carolina's just reminding us again, when the word Moedei is used, it's Moedei Yahweh because it's Yahweh's appointed times. But in Bereshit, you'll see the word Moedim because it's referring to, we know it's still Yahweh's appointments, but the construct of the language is that Moedei Yahweh is used here because it's a connected word to Yahweh, emphasizing that the appointed times are his. Okay? So what makes these appointed times different to any other time? It's that they're called and to be proclaimed as set-apart gatherings. That's what makes it different. The Hebrew word proclaim comes from the word kara, which means to call out, proclaim, summons, invite. We think of the wedding parable, go out and invite because the call has gone out. The voice of Yahweh has been made known, but who's listening? Who has ears to hear? Now, set apart, we've spoken at length, kadosh in Hebrew and hagiasmos in Greek. We are learning the last two chapters before this, what it means and what is required to be set apart. Now, we prefer to use the English word set apart for the Hebrew kadosh or kodesh and hagios in the Greek, rather than the adopted pagan term that's used in many translations as holy. A frequent word that's used in the Christian language, used in trying to identify or present the Hebrew kadosh or kodesh and hagios, and most simply use this just because they've been taught that. They're taught that holy means set apart. However, when you dig a little further into the root of this word, you understand its intended meaning, then certainly it uncovers what most people won't really like to hear, but need to hear. According to a dictionary of mythology and folklore and symbols, the word holy is described as being practically in all languages. The word for holy is derived from the divinely honored Son. Now, what's worth taking note of is that the word holy or holi is also referred to as the great Hindu festival, as a spring festival celebration held in honor of Krishna, as a spring sun deity or sun god, personified as the woman called Holly or Holy. And Holly tried to kill the babe Krishna. That's in their mythology. Now, according to a Strong's Concordance, we get the Greek word that is referred to being that which is judged by the sunlight or tested by the sunlight, and it comes from a word hail, which is reference to a sun's ray or a ray of the sun. Now, this root is similar to many Dutch and German equivalents of the English word holy, as in hail, or even Afrikaans heilig. Okay? And there's too much similarity in these words, which are rooted in corrupt worship of sun deities that have nothing to do with prescribing being set apart from the nations. So we have to ask ourselves, one of the things, the German and Dutch word holy derived from heilig or from hail. You have to ask yourself, who or what is hail? Now, hail was a Saxon idol. It becomes very disturbing when we hear these things. For some of you might have heard it before. For others, this might be new. It's like, whoa, what's going on? Even Nicole is saying, wow, heilig in Dutch. Yes, it's rooted in pagan sun worship, And I'm so thankful that Nicole got a copy of the scriptures not so long ago. And what the scriptures does, I'm not saying it's a perfect translation from Hebrew and Greek into English, because there's language translational errors that tend to come sometimes. But what the scriptures does help us do is have proper wording restored. Set apart is preferred than the traditional word for holy, because holy has roots in sun worship that we have come out from. That's the point that I'm trying to help get across, Satan's plan, the whore's plan, is to direct or redirect our worship or attempt at worship to Yahweh away from Yahweh and corrupt it. Yechezkiel 8 tells us how Elohim shows the prophet all the abominations that were going on. And many images are made as supposed pictures of Messiah and Mary, so to speak, as corrupt worship in our modern day things. And it's no different in Yechezkiel's day, when Yahweh showed him all the abominable things that were being done, because they adopted sun worship practices of the nations in an attempt to draw near to Yahweh. The other thing in terms of set apart as opposed to holy, I hope that I've addressed that. There's another word that's frequently used in Christianity, an English word, in its attempt at presenting something that's supposed to be set apart. And that is the Hebrew word, or the English word, sacred. Now, the Hebrew word sacred can be traced back to the Sanskrit sakra. Now, when we understand, I'm giving you a little bit of history to help you realize and maybe get a little bit shocked for good reason, so that you don't use these words loosely that we were trained to use in corruption. Indra was one of the 12 forms of a sun deity, and he was also known as Sakra. And in the 12th form, he was known as Mitra. So there was 12 different forms. The origin, Mitra, is the origin of the Roman Mithras, who was associated with the sun deity and became the sun deity known in Latin as Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun deity, which at its root is Tammuz worship, the sun that was born out of corrupt fertility worship from Astarte, or Easter, the mother wife of Nimrod. So a whole lot of stuff rooted way back from just after, not long after the flood. Many of you are thinking that this sounds too much like Roman Catholic, and you're right. Mithras was worshipped by the first emperor pope, Constantine, who sought a way of officially blending pagan ways with an attempt at causing the masses to come together in one world religion. Catholic means universal. And through this, he birthed Christianity, giving it all its pagan-rooted words and forms for worship And it's time for children to come out of the hall. Come out of her, my people. I encourage you to test these things. You know, people say, it doesn't mean that for me, doesn't mean that for me. No, we need to have a clean lip restored unto us, you know. Using terms such as holy or sacred when referring to the set-apart matters of Elohim is not a reference to his set-apartness. And therefore, knowing the reference to our master as the Ruach HaKodesh, his set-apart spirit, we cannot use terminology and think that Holy Spirit represents the very breath and spirit of our master. It's rather the spirit of the anti-Messiah. And we are to live set-apart lives unto our master. And even in English, set-apart describes Kodesh and Hagios more perfectly, because it means to be set apart, not joined to corruption. Now, I've highlighted that because that's what the Sabbaths and feasts of Yahweh are. They are called out, set apart gatherings. And gathering is exactly that. It comes from the word mikra, which mikra comes from the root word kara. Mikra means an assembly, a collective of people for a purpose, a calling together. I thank Yahweh that in this day and age we're able to gather, even online, with our brothers and sisters around the world. I mean, one day we're going to all be physically together, but it's still set apart, and we should treat it as such. Because treating something and a day and a gathering is set apart. The Sabbath is set apart, but within that Sabbath we are to have a gathering, a time of coming together in proper set apartness. You know, and in verse 3 we establish that the appointed times of Yahweh are set. Now, I just wanted to highlight, coming back to appointments, because if you don't show up at the right time, you're either late or early, and then you're not on time. I mean, that's a simple thing. Now, we need to understand our master gave us the lights. He gave us the sun and the moon to understand, and we need to follow the cycle of the sun and the moon. The Sabbath, we know, is every seventh day. And we've established that Yahweh doesn't change, and therefore his Sabbath doesn't change, and no authority on this earth has a right to change his Sabbath for another day and claim that it's set apart. Now, man might claim that Sunday is holy. Well, let him do that, because it's not set apart. We need to realize that when we miss our appointment with our Elohim, we risk being cut off. You know, we looked, and I'll get to it when we get there, but we looked at the Day of Atonement, and very clearly Yahweh says the being who doesn't afflict his being, Yahweh himself, or does any work on that day, will he himself will cut that person off. Now, Yom Kippur is the Sabbath of Sabbaths, because it's what every Sabbath in entering his rest is rehearsing toward, because it's on Yom Kippur when he'll come out and complete his work and receive us. The Sabbath is a time to gather, and gather in his presence. It's so important because it marks us. Yahweh rebuked Israel in Yechezkel 20 when he said, I gave you my Sabbath as a sign between you and me to know that I am setting you apart, and you profaned it. You come back to again, true worship or profanity. When you don't keep the Sabbath, sunset to sunset, set apart, you're profaning it. And keeping it just for an hour is not keeping his Sabbath set apart. You know, so I'm going to put my notes away, and if I need to come to them for a couple of words, I will. I'm going to run through the scriptures and just go chronologically through these feasts to highlight some clear witnesses of what we are to be keeping. Now, the appointed times of Yahweh, he says, you proclaim these as my appointed times. Then he says 6 days work is done. On the Sabbath, you have a set apart gathering. So he sets the standard for all the appointments by how we guard the Sabbath. So he says, these are my appointed times. And he starts with the Sabbath. Then he goes, these are the appointed times outside of the Sabbaths, but the standard is the Sabbath. And you do no work. It's a Sabbath to Yahweh in all your dwellings. So we already learned the standard by which an appointment with Yahweh is not that we think we're keeping something, but we're not in his presence. You know what I'm saying? So we draw near. First new moon on the 14th day of the new moon, between the evenings, the Pesach to Yahweh. The 15th day begins Matzot. So when do we eat the Pesach meal? We eat it on the 15th. We must understand the timing here. Firstly, we need to know when we start. And so Rosh Hashanah means head of the year. Now, why I'm saying it's important to understand this chapter is because when we understand this chapter and are taught correctly, we'll be on guard against corruption of man's changing of times, because Daniel 4 or Daniel 7 verse 25 tells us that the fourth beast, which is likened to Rome, attempts to change the times and laws of our Creator, attempts to change the Moedim or the Moed Day of Yahweh. How? By bringing in their own ones. Now, the fourth beast is only doing something that was done in corruption by Israel, the house of Israel, with Yarovam. Because Yarovam, when he threw out the Levitical priesthood and he set up 2 golden calves, he also had a feast in the 8th month, like the feast of the Yehudim in the 7th month. In other words, he thought, I'll do my own feast and this will be our feast. So already there was a move to establish a change in Yahweh's appointments when Yahweh didn't. And throwing out his appointed priesthood is also a change in the laws. So we see this, and so we understand that now we need to recognize that Rosh Hashanah is the first of the year. Traditions of corrupt worship under Rabbinic Judaism claims that Yom Teruah is Rosh Hashanah. Okay? Now, Rosh Hashanah is the first head of the year, first of the first month. The 7th month, Yom Teruah, is the first of the 7th month. It's not the beginning of a year. So we need to dispel that. And it doesn't matter how many placards out of shops you see every year and saying Rosh Hashanah, or people saying that to you, learn from this chapter. Nowhere in this chapter does the 7th month say it starts the year. Okay? So Yahweh chronologically gives out in the first month, the 3rd month, or, well, we know it's the 3rd month because it gives a count to that 3rd month, and in the 7th month. Okay, the 7th month never becomes the 1st month. That's the change in laws that man has done, either in Christianity, trying to change the 7th day to the 1st day, or in Rabbinic Judaism, change the 7th month into the 1st month. So the Pesach meal, when Israel were in Mitzrayim, it was on the 14th day that they were to apply the blood of the lamb to their doorposts and lintels, so that the messenger of death would pass over the houses that had applied the blood, and they were to, then the firstborn would not be struck. In any house that did not have firstborn, from Pharaoh to the woman who sat at the weavers or the wheel, their firstborn was taken. The instruction was very clear. You eat roasted lamb and, slaughter a lamb and apply the lamb, and they were to gird their garments on, be ready. And so when the messenger of death came over, their houses would be covered. So when we look at this later on in Shemot 11 and 12, we're then given, Yahweh gave Israel a clear instruction what would be observed every year. Is that on the 14th, the Passover lamb would be slain, and then that evening, which would begin the 15th, is when you would begin the festival of Matzah, and that's when you'd have the remembrance meal. So when our master was in the flesh of man as the Passover lamb, he had an early meal with his taught ones. This meal is not a Passover meal that he had, but it was a very informative and instructive meal of establishing a new ordinance that would be done in remembrance of him. But it was new in the sense of a change of the law that we speaking of in the Levitical priesthood to the order of Melchizedek, but it establishes the further need for us to partake in this meal and that which he instituted, so that we are able to remember his death and recognize the need to keep his appointments, so that we keep ourselves in the house. He had a meal at the beginning of the 14th, and that's when Yehuda was the one who went out and got the guards to come and take our master, and he was arrested. And through that night, they had a whole lot of going back and forward between authorities. He was impaled on the 14th. And in the afternoon offering at that time, he gave up his spirit when he took the sour wine, and he said, "It is accomplished," a picture again of taking the vinegar, taking the yeast out, the sin out of our lives. And he gave up his breath, and there was darkness over the land for 3 hours. And then when Yosef from Kiriathim, Ramathaim, thank you, came and asked Pilate to take down the body, and they laid it in the tomb before the sunset, because we also understand, according to the Torah, that if anybody is left on a stake after a day, after sunset, the land is cursed. So we see that our master took the curse upon himself. He was laid in a tomb, and that night began Matzot. And when our master died, the graves of many were open, but they laid open for 3 days and 3 nights. And only when he rose at the end of Sabbath, so he died, at that year he died on the 4th day of the week. So it was day 1, day 2, day 3. You count 3 days, 3 nights. You come to sunset Sabbath when he arose as master of the Sabbath. And those that were in the graves also rose after him. But I'll come back to them just now. So the Pesach meal, we eat at the beginning of Matzot. There are debates today, and I've done an article on it, when we eat 14th or 15th, and I go into depth scriptures from Hebrew and Greek showing why we eat the meal at the beginning of Matzot and not on the 14th when he had a meal with his taught ones, because he was not yet the Passover lamb. And before you eat the meal, you have to get all the yeast out. Now, the 14th is the preparation day when you must get the yeast or the leaven out of your homes. So therefore, you cannot have the meal while you are still to be getting the leaven out your homes. That's just one aspect, okay? So we start the feast having a night of watches. Shemot 12 says this is that night of watches where we stay awake the whole night. And only in the morning do we then go our way. Now, the Passover meal can be had individually in homes, or we like to get together, but then we all stay awake. It's easier when you're a group of people to keep each other awake through the night, okay? But it's that night of watches for all generations of the children of Israel. We eat lamb, bitter herbs, and unleavened bread, and we partake of the cup of remembrance and breaking bread of our master in remembrance for what he's done. And that's the simplistic way of guarding the Pesach meal. You do not need to follow a 15-step Haggadah, which means Haggadah, which means to tell the story. The other thing that we are to do during the evening, according to the Torah, is to retell the story of the Exodus. Okay, so when your generations ask you, what does this mean? You can explain the story. But following a scripted 15-step Haggadah in Rabbinic Judaism is a corruption of service, because in that they have certain prayers and recitals that are not in Scripture. Because they'll even, now I confess today, our very first Pesach, we did it in error. Because we were eager and zealous and learning, and we followed, but following it, we asked, where in Scripture did it say, thank you for the command to command to wash our hands? You know, and this ritualistic thing of washing this way, that way, and every which way, having a chicken bone on the table and etc. You know, we must be on guard against these traditions. Another thing to take into account is the Pesach meal is not for foreigners. It's a covenant meal for a bride. Those who have been immersed in the name of Yeshua Messiah. Because Shemot gives a clear Torah of the Passover. And that is, no uncircumcised male may eat of it. And we understand the circumcision that we receive now, according to Galatians and Colossians. We understand that the circumcision that was given to Abraham was a sign of the covenant until the seed. It wasn't the covenant itself. The covenant of circumcision was a sign of the covenant unto the seed. The seed is Messiah. Messiah was circumcised on the eighth day of Sukkot. And in his death, his blood now secures a covenant by which we can only enter into, not by the foreskin of our flesh, but by immersion in his name, where we receive a circumcision not done by the hands of men, but that which is from above. So unless you have been immersed in the name of Yeshua Messiah, you are not allowed to partake of the Pesach meal. It is not it's not a reach out, an outreach, outreach. Okay? None of the feasts of Yahweh are outreaches, because as we see here very clearly, no stranger may eat of it. Okay, so they're set apart, appointed times. So we have the meal and our gathering when we gather together. That's the set apart gathering that we have on the first day through the night. Okay, is there something you want to share?
Also to say, we've had some comments about you can't afford a lamb, you don't have to. the words you must eat
Yes.
lamb or goat.
Yes.
And because it says there, if you can't, then you join households
Yes.
and go together. It doesn't
Yes.
say if you can't afford it, just
No.
give it up.
No. No. It's a requirement because it's a remembrance meal that we literally live out correctly in obedience to the Master. And for 7 days, we bring an offering made by fire to Yahweh. And on the seventh day, we have a set-apart gathering. We do no servile work. And during that week, we have no leaven in our homes. And we understand the process. You can read a lot of the different messages I've given out. I just want to give a quick overview, as quick as I can, of these feasts. But I need to go chronologically through because there are certain things that people are following traditionally, thinking they're right, and they're not being refined in the process. You know, so... Yes, within your borders. So that which you have control over, there should be no yeast in. This also means you don't take the leaven out of your home and go and store it in a storage space to bring it back. It must be destroyed. You don't go and sell it off to somebody. You don't go put it in your office and bring it back. Another thing, very touchy subject, so I don't know if I want to touch too much on it, but sometimes I like touching things I know people don't like touching, but in a clean manner. And that is, you know, I mentioned a few weeks ago that I firmly believe, scripturally speaking, that no set-apart believer should drink alcohol. Because as long as we're the body of Messiah and he's interceding for us, we're in service. And that was the instruction that was given to Aharon after his sons were struck dead. And so therefore, some people traditionally like to take their alcohol out, store it away because it costs too much, and bring the alcohol back. You shouldn't have alcohol in your house in the first place. Unless you've got medicinal tinctures, which is not drinking. They are certain things for preservatives, but that you also get out. And we can speak more of that when we get closer to this next cycle again. But we keep our borders clean. Okay. Then bringing an offering made by fire to Yahweh, it helps us understand. We spoke at Pesach at Sukkot this year about the entrance and the exit and guarding the entire feast, that we shouldn't really be. That's our time with Yahweh. Now, the 3 times a year that the males would go up to Jerusalem, they wouldn't be in their lands doing their normal occupational work of their lands. They'd be bringing the offering. So somebody asked during Sukkot when we were explaining this, does that mean for Matzot that we should also not work? I'd said ideally, because remember, the service that it would take in bringing an offering made by fire daily would certainly require time, effort on a practical level. So therefore, I would go so far as to say as that the Feast of Matzot and the Feast of Sukkot should be our times with Yahweh, where we are distinctly setting them apart as not doing our daily normal routines that we would be in working the fields, so to speak. Okay, but then on the last day, the 7th day, you also have a set apart where there is no occupational work. It's treated more like the Sabbath, but the other days aren't treated in a lesser regard because it still is within the borders of Yahweh and bringing that offering every day. So the idea of we must always picture in a scattered state, we must picture what it must have been like to travel to there to keep it. You would have made provision to be guarding this feast collectively. Now there's always the story, but those that live in Jerusalem, yes, they wouldn't have been trading at all on the first and last days, because people would come and they'd have to buy their offerings because it was too far maybe to bring their lambs or their bulls with. So they come. That would have been done in the other days because they could bring their offerings, but it still is with the focus of the feast.
Yeah, feast related.
It's all feast related things that are done in the other days that aren't the set apart days when the gatherings are had for everybody. Does that make sense? Okay, so then during this week, every week has a Sabbath. Okay, anybody that can count realizes that. So during the Feast of Matzot, there is a Sabbath. And the morrow after the Sabbath, during the Feast of Matzot, the high priest would wave the sheaf of the first. And so therefore, we also understand that this in itself would represent when he brings the Omer Reshit, the sheaf of the first. Now, I want to highlight again something that should not be done traditionally or traditionally thought through different pictures. You know, we know the menorah represents certainly the feasts of Yahweh, the light. It represents the assemblies, and it's a good picture to learn lessons from. The 22 almond blossoms on it, the 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet, you know, the 6 branches and the one main branch representing again the man and our creator and being grafted into him. There's all those pictures. But a lot of times people send out, and each one they'll have the name of the 7 feasts. And typically for the Omer Reshit, people refer to that as the Bikurim, or the first fruits. But it's not the first fruits that's brought during unleavened bread. What is brought during unleavened bread is a sheaf of the first. And therefore, when the high priest has waved the sheaf of the first, we begin to count. Now that Omer Reshit, the waving of the first, will always take place on the first day of a week. And then we count 7 completed Sabbaths. It's important to understand that, because there are people that also get their counting wrong, because traditionally people begin the Feast of Matzah on the 15th, and then on the 16th of Aviv or Nisan, they have the wave offering and count 7 weeks from that, regardless of what day it is. Okay? And so therefore, if you do that, and it's not from a first day of the week, you can never get 7 completed Sabbaths. You might get 7 weeks, as in 49 days, and come to the 50th, but you will never get fully 7 completed Sabbaths. So we must dispel the rabbinic tradition of counting from the 16th of the first month. You begin your count on the morrow after the Sabbath during unleavened bread. You begin your count and you complete 7 weeks and 1 day, coming to Shavuot always being on the first day of a week. So when the believers were gathered in the book of Acts as recorded on the first day of the week, it wasn't a verse to justify Christian theology of that's why we gather on a Sunday, because Shavuot, the Feast of Weeks, will always be on the first day of the week when you're counting correctly. Okay, so when our master died, the graves were opened. After 3 days, 3 nights, he came out of the grave, firstborn among the dead, and the dead in the tombs that were open came out at the end of Sabbath, and they knocked on doors and they said hello to people. Okay, that must have been real freaky for some. And the next morning, he offered up as high priest these as a sheaf of the first, because the first secures the last. Without the high priest waving the sheaf, the harvest cannot begin. Because only once he's waved the sheaf can you begin your harvest. And therefore, over the next 7 weeks, you would go and get your harvest ready and bring it in. Now, so there we got the timing of that right, okay? And it's not the Bikurim, because the first fruits are brought at Shavuot 7 weeks later. But the first fruits of your harvest can only be brought 7 weeks later when the high priest has waved the sheaf, signifying it's like, go, you know? And so as high priest, he has given us this assurance. In the book of Chazon, we are given a number of 144,000 twice, in chapter 7 and chapter 14. In chapter 7, it's regarding the number of those that are sealed. It's a metaphoric number signifying the completeness. It's not some Jehovah's Witness pyramid scheme that if you're not going out getting people, you won't make the 144,000, because that's what they teach. It's not that. It's the tribes of Israel, and I'll go into depth when I'm Revelation teachings of that. But then in 14, it talks about the 144,000, the first fruits of the land. And it fits perfectly in the parable sense of that the first secures the last, because our master said he shows loving commitment to 1,000 generations of those who love him. So therefore, we know, as I've discussed with the genealogy of Messiah and from Adam, there has not yet even been 100 generations of mankind. So 1,000 generations is verbal language to highlight eternity. So his loving commitment never stops to those who love him. So with 1,000, 12,000 of each tribe, 12 times 12, getting 144,000, shows that each part of the tribe represents the whole, because 12 represents the body of Israel, or the full house of Israel and Yehuda collectively together. And with each having 12,000, it's symbol of joined together in one, and one part represents the whole. So the 144,000 symbolizes the complete body of Messiah being redeemed. And with him taking, if it was a literal number of 144,000, it's not that, but the parable behind the revelation that he's given is that the fact that he took those that came out of the grave after his resurrection secures a complete harvest at the end of the age. Okay, so the Omer sheet is waved. I just want to highlight the start of the year, getting back to this again, because it's important. If we go after lunch, it's important that we get this timing right and dispel wrong ways. You know, at the beginning of the month or the year, the Aviv, what does Aviv mean? Aviv is a word that helps us understand a ripening of the ears. It's a state in which the wheat and the barley begin to mature in the head. And so we begin to see some changes in it where we know the harvest is now about to be ready to be declared fit to be harvested once the high priest has a sheaf to wave. It becomes green. It's not fully mature yet, but it is showing that it is now time in this season. But more importantly, we have to understand that Aviv highlights more than just barley. I know through dictionaries it means green ears, ripe green ears and things, but it carries so much more because it's a determination in the Northern Hemisphere of springtime coming in. And there are many other factors that help us understand in terms of migration of birds, blossoming of flowers, lambs giving birth. There's a whole lot of signs within nature. Lambs don't give birth. Lambs being born, okay? And so while there are many groups today that have what I call the barley wars each year, and they build it up with such a hype as if you can't know if the year's going to start until that last second, we have to be on guard against getting so worked up. When we go back to the simplistic or the simple description and of what is used for the appointed times and the lights in the expanse, we must follow the cycle of the sun and the moon. And so therefore we follow the equinox that is used in our, if we say March, April time or the September, October time as clear times of divisions of the year in its seasons. We then are able to understand that the moon gives us a clear witness of months. And we know that a month begins when light is being illumined on the moon because it's a light. So how do you know when to start? When the light's not on. Okay. The book of Hanoch makes it very clear describing the luminaries, and it goes deep into that a month begins when light begins to be illumined on the moon. There are many people that are following what they call a dark moon or a conjunction. And this year was no different because there were many people who started Sukkot early, and in actual fact, they started the year early. Now, here's what will present a problem. In Proverbs, the whore that Shlomo uses to describe to lure people away, she gives some interesting, he's writing the parable language of the whore, saying, my husband's gone on a journey. He's coming home on the day of the covering. And the Hebrew word for covering, keseh, is referring to a covering of light, which means fully covered. So when is the husband coming home? When the moon is fully covered with light. And the time the moon is fully covered with light is, according to Hanoch, on the 14th, the moon becomes full, and at the end of the 15th, it begins to wane. So, two feasts which begin on the full moon is Matzot on the 15th and Sukkot on the 15th. This year, those that began a day early began when the moon was not yet full, because this year, I'm going to use Gregorian dates to help people understand. We started Sukkot at sunset of the 7th of October this year. The moon became full during the day of the 7th of October. And so therefore, by the time sunset started, it's the full moon, we started Sukkot. Those that started a day early started before the full moon. So they're starting their celebration of the wedding feast in parabolic sense before the husbands come home. And the same thing with Pesach. And you will find that when people do this, that we got confirmation. I've kept the record of our calendar keeping since 2010. So I've got 16 years of a record of every month when we've kept the months and the sighting of the moon, etc. And it was around 2016, 17, 2 years where we had 4 blood moons. And it was confirmed to us when these blood moons took place on Pesach, Sukkot, 2 years in a row. So I just want to highlight that using the sun and the cycle of the sun and the new moon that's closest to the equinox begins the year. That will give us 15 days at least before the start of Matzot. And then a couple of days, maybe 2 or 3, because sometimes Matzot might start when the Sabbath, the morrow after the Sabbath is the next day or the day after. So we understand that you've at least got 15 or 16 days. What is abundantly clear is that in our observance, the barley has always been Aviv after the equinox, because the waving of the sheaf will always take place after the equinox. Because if you've got the new moon closest to the equinox, by the time you get to the waving of the sheaf, it will be after the equinox. Okay? Now we have to understand that barley is an important factor. We're not denying it, but I always said it like this, that we follow the lights in the expanse to give us Yahweh's clock, the time. It's declared in the expanse. It's confirmed on the earth by the various witnesses. So the confirmation is not the declaration. So barley is not the declaration of when you start. It's the confirmation of what the lights have declared.
And just also to clarify, equinox is obviously equal nights and days.
Yes.
Scripture calls it the turning of the year.
Yes.
It's when that point where the time
Yes.
starts turning again. So it's not a Greek thing.
No,
or
and it's not sun worship.
Yeah.
In Hebrew, it's called tekufa, and it's used a number of times in Scripture in terms of when the sovereigns would go out for war at the turn of the year, and it's a clear witness of the cycle of the sun. We cannot neglect the cycle of the sun. We are not sun worshippers. Yahweh gave the lights to know his appointed times. If you don't keep that as a base, you can be led astray. Okay? And so it needs to be lights that we look at. So it needs to be the moon that starts to light, number one. But which moon begins the year? The new moon closest to the equinox. And we know the cycles, and the ancients understood from their sundials when it was. I'm not even going to get into timing when the timing changed in the days of Hizkiyahu. That's for another day, when it went from 2930 or 30 to 2930. Okay, what I'm trying to highlight here is we need to get the understanding of recognizing timing is critical. Okay, because if you show up too late or too early, the door isn't open or it's shut. That's the bottom line, you know. And so, okay, so on the morrow after the Sabbath, the priest waves it, and you have 7 completed Sabbaths counting. You come to Shavuot. Shavuot is when the Bikurim is brought. Now, the Bikurim is the first fruits, because that's from the harvest. Now, think about it. You can't bring first fruits of the harvest when the harvest hasn't even started on the Omer Reshit. The priest just waves a sheaf to declare you can now start the harvest. 7 weeks later, you need to bring that offering of the first fruits to Yahweh. Okay, so we also understand that the first fruits to Yahweh is with leaven. So there's a parable that our master uses about the kingdom of heaven is likened to a woman who took 3 measures and she put leaven in it. It's the kingdom leaven from above, because the picture of Pesach and Matzah is getting rid of the leaven of this earth, so that in us, the bread making process, it can be properly worked in the kingdom of the reign, so that when 2 loaves are waved, it's symbolic of an acceptable house, because the bread is representative of the community. The 2 loaves is symbolic of the 2 houses now coming together, accepted before the master as a wave offering and brought in celebration of that. And that is also when we see this is a symbol of remembrance of the Spirit that was poured out, and the law now written on the tablets of our heart and not on fleshly tablets of stone. It was at Mount Sinai on Shavuot when Yahweh entered into a marriage covenant with the house, with Israel. And we see that when people rebelled, and the many were struck dead because they, on the edge of the camp, at Shavuot, 3,000 people were added to the number that day. So it's a picture again of the prophecies, part prophecies of Yechezkiel, and the 2 houses, the 2 sticks coming together, the restoration, that renewal that takes place. And so a brand new covenant wasn't made, but a renewal of the covenant was made. And it's brand new to every generation, because that's what they get grafted into. Okay? Our master says to his taught ones, don't say 4 months to the harvest. The harvest is plentiful, ask the Father for the harvest. Now, that's a clue for us in terms of timing, because from the 3rd month, when Shavuot is observed, the Feast of Weeks, Pentecost, to the 7th month is 4 months. So we are to be about working the field, because the field is the world, And we must be working the field, and we must be sowing and planting and watering and doing our bit, so that we don't come and sit back and say, oh, well, he'll just fetch us. We are to be about teaching the nations to guard the commands, immersing them in his name. Then Yom Teruah, I think I'm going to discuss the 7th month feast after lunch. I think it's very important. I don't want to just rush through it. I think it's important that and if there's anything that anybody is still struggling with in terms of Pesach, Matzot, Shavuot, you can certainly ask after lunch. I'm just going to read a couple of comments here. Nicole said, I need to confess that I came in late today. I made it late last night, woke up late also. Father, forgive me and thank you for pointing it out to me and sending your servants my way to teach me to do better, to truly observe and guard like you want us to. Then she said, so many of us did. First, I came to the true faith. I started listening to a so-called rabbi and their Talmudic traditions. Yahweh took me out of their fast. Bless his heart. Carol said, some claim that at conjunction, light can be seen on the moon in the southern hemisphere, but not in the northern hemisphere. I think that's just another of rabbinic excuses who are leading astray. Well, you know what? In this day and age, I suppose when you've got super telescopic lenses, you can probably see things that you cannot see when you look up with your naked eye. So, okay, so look, what we've come to observe, we've got lots of technology today to give astronomical calculations and illumination percentages, etc., which I don't discard. We also watch to see, and what we've observed, because I can only go on what we've observed. And now that's why I've kept records, because it's not a case of I'm just saying this. We've practically lived this. And I've wrestled through over 10 various adaptations of calendars, and we keep coming back to what Yahweh's clearly shown us as the consistent witness and pattern to follow without having all the argy-bargy wars of nonsense, and anything under 1% illumination. While astronomically people are saying, but there's illumination, it's not possible to see that when looking up. And so anything from 1% up can be seen when it's perfect conditions, but typically it's normally around from 1.2, and I'll even go so far as to say that it can go up to about 4%. Once it starts going 4%, starts to become questionable about a first day, then we look at the amount of time between the sunset and the moonset. Again, when we're following the cycles, because the moon follows the sun and there's a loss of time, etc., but we'll find that a first day new moon, the moon will not be up longer than an hour to an hour and a half. If it starts going beyond an hour and a half to 2 hours after the sunset, then you know that it's not a first new moon. So there's all these observances that we've kept. I'm even trying to dig in each year more about the degrees, which I'm trying to learn a lot more. But just on our practical observance, we're refining our ability to recognize when, and we don't just take lightly and look at things, we still want to observe it, physically see. So, light is one of the most important aspects of Scripture. Light from darkness. So if you're going on a dark moon, that should tell you already, hold on, get out of the darkness, and just on a practical level. Okay, so on that note, I'll carry on with the 7th month appointments after lunch. Let's pray. Master Yahweh, we bless you and praise you and thank you that we can sit here going through your word, and that you would bring clarity and insight and understanding, especially when it comes to your Sabbaths, your appointed times, and helping us strip away all the junk of inherited lies so that we can run in the way of your commands and perfect the set apartness that is your desire for our lives. Thank you that we can partake in a Sabbath meal together, and I pray you bless every home that is joining in with us according to your perfect design. And I thank you that we can declare that you are our provider. You are the one who gives us all that we need to keep serving you and to grow our understanding of who you are, that sets us apart so that we truly can be set apart according to your perfect word that sets us free, and not according to the corrupted traditions of man that actually have taken us away in error. But now we come to you in hunger for your truth. In the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen and amen.